The contest between the philosophies of self-restraint and self-indulgence is as old as time. Each philosophy has had its patron gods and temples, and human nature hasn't changed much over the millennia. The techniques that Satan uses today are only a variation of the ones he's used down through history to corrupt and ruin entire societies. In ancient times, God's people fell into sin again and again by the worship of false gods. It might help us to understand the nature of several of these false gods. We will see that, in fact, they are still very much alive today. Back in the ancient Middle East, three gods vied for devotion: Moloch, god of cruelty; Baal or Baal, lord of lust; and Jehovah, the god of compassion and justice. Well, let's look first at the god Moloch. The worship of Moloch involved terrible cruelty. It was associated with human sacrifice and making one's children pass through the fire. The word Moloch actually means king. Moloch was the king of cruelty. Believe it or not, some of these horrible practices are actually experiencing a revival today. Sacrificing children. Think about that. Then there were the Baals. There were many of them. The word Baal means Lord, and Baal was the lord of lust. He was regarded as the source of the mysterious power of life and growth. He was believed to make the corn grow, the grape swell, the olive ripen, and the child to grow in the womb. Thus, Baal was the source of the power in sex to create life. Hence, the sexual act became a sacred act devoted to Baal. And the temples of Baal had crowds of priestesses who were sacred prostitutes. One worshipped by having sex with the priestess. Well, such a religion had a fatal attraction to the lower side of man's nature and ended in total degradation of the creature. Why? Well, because people will inevitably become like the god that they worship. Those who worship a depraved god become depraved. Those who worship the god of vengeance become merciless. When a man has nothing higher than himself to worship, he will inevitably slip lower and lower. Whenever God's ancient people, Israel, fell into these debasing practices, God withdrew his blessing from them, and they faced the horrors of war, famine, and pestilence. Well, you say, Lonnie, today we have no longer worship of Baal and Moloch. We have no pagan temples where the disciples of Baal and Moloch come to be initiated into the mysteries of sex and violence. Or do we? Let's talk about the cinema for a moment. Perhaps you have never thought of it this way, but the cinema is the pagan counterpart to the church, where Satan's sermons are preached nightly with great effectiveness from the silver screen. The church has its prayer meeting, and the theater has its curse meeting, where the Ten Commandments are routinely broken and the grace of God is mocked, where the modern Moloch of savagery and the modern Baal of lust is exalted. The cinema brings to us in exciting, living technicolor all that is vile and low in society. It conditions those who attend to play the voyeur and to derive vicarious pleasure from the portrayal of others' pain. The cinema is basically a secular humanist church, a church that demands no commitment, fosters no fellowship, no calls for sacrifice, but does collect an offering and does transmit values and change behavior. very effectively. Perhaps some will feel I'm speaking too strongly. You may be surprised to know that the position I am taking has been the historic position of the Christian church down through the centuries. In fact, at one time, theater attendance was reason for excommunication. Did you know that? Notice this statement from the ancient church father Athanasius, 1,000 years ago, in his Canons number 26. I'm quoting, "None of the children of the church shall go into the theater or into the places of assembly or any places of the heathen. If any should venture to go there, he shall be separated and left without till he do penance." Another of the church fathers, way back there, Theophilus of Antioch, has this to say in Ad Autolycum 3:15. I'm quoting, "We are forbidden even to witness gladiatorial shows, lest we should become participants and accomplices in murders. And we are not allowed to witness the other spectacles, lest our eyes and ears should be defiled by taking part in the songs which are sung there." Let's go back even farther in time, 2,000 years ago. There was an ancient Jewish philosopher by the name of Philo who lived in Alexandria at the same time that Jesus lived in Judea. Here's what Philo had to say about the theater in his treatise Agricultura 35. "For what other reason do we imagine that theaters all over the world are filled daily with innumerable multitudes? The people who are slaves to musical performances and spectacles, allowing ears and eyes to be borne about unbridled, honoring lutists and the singers that accompany them, and every form of unmanly and effeminate music, favoring dancers and other actors, because they execute and hold effeminate poses and movements, applauding the incessant warfare on the state without a thought for their own improvement or that of the community, but, wretches that they are, overturning through eyes and ears their own life." You know, it seems that down through the Western history, the theater has never been known for high standards of morality. Oh, and today, when you attend the theater, you are not merely a spectator, but a participant. You see, your fees are supporting Hollywood. Well, unfortunately, today one cannot avoid these evils simply by avoiding the theater. Hollywood's toxic waste flows directly into our living rooms. Nowadays, someone living in a rural area does not have to leave home or be exposed to the decadence of the city. The electronic shrine now sits in our den. So we must decide how much of the world we want to bring into our own homes. What television brings us is a picture of society that is almost wholly alien to the kingdom of heaven. It is a world without God. The tragedy is that so many Christians are comfortable with that world. In 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 11, Peter writes, "I urge you, as aliens and strangers in the world, to abstain from sinful desires." Now let's face it, the world has a lot to offer, more than ever, in fact. There's one thing wrong with it, though. It's not home. Christians should never feel completely comfortable in this world because we are citizens of another country. We are aliens here. James 4:4 says, "You adulterous people, don't you know that friendship with the world is hatred toward God? Anyone who chooses to be a friend of the world becomes an enemy of God." God calls us not to give up on the world, but to give up those debasing values and corrupting pleasures that characterize the world. 1 John chapter 2, verse 16 explains what these are. the cravings of sinful man, the lust of his eyes, and the boasting of what he has and does. These are the world's values, says John. They are also the values of television. My friend, giving up the world is not giving up fun. Listen, it's not giving up beauty. It's not giving up education and learning. Instead, it is holding a different set of values. It is avoiding those attractions that put one on the road to personal and national ruin. If we're going to develop and maintain a clean and wholesome environment for our families, for our children, we'll want to follow the counsel of those good men who spoke for God in Bible times. David, the psalmist, in Psalm 101 verse 3 says, "I will set before my eyes no vile thing." Why is it so important for us to follow that advice? Because what we see, what we hear, what we experience is what we become. By beholding, we become changed. The poet Walt Whitman put it this way in his book, Leaves of Grass, and I'm quoting, "There was a child went forth every day, and the first object he looked upon, that object he became. And that object became part of him for the day or a certain part of the day, or for many years of stretching cycles of years." Alexander Pope, in his essay on man, put it this way, "Vice is a monster of so frightful mien as to be hated needs but to be seen, yet seen too oft, familiar with her face, we first endure, then pity, then embrace." Arthur Linehan, in the booklet Soundings, tells a story about a type of jellyfish whose home is in the Bay of Naples, Italy. Well, the jellyfish is called Medusa. In the bay, too, are snails of the nudibranch variety. When these snails are little, the jellyfish may swallow one of them. The jellyfish draws the snail into its digestive tract. However, the snail is protected by its shell. The jellyfish can't digest it. The snail fastens itself to the inside of the jellyfish and slowly begins to eat it. By the time the snail grows to maturity, it has consumed the entire jellyfish. Friends, sometimes the things we swallow consume us. Things we take into our heart can harden it. Things we allow into our soul can lay it waste. Be careful, very careful, what you allow to come through your eyes into your heart. Don't let the philosophy of the world subtly infect your thinking. God has something better in mind for you. Back in ancient times, worship at the shrine of Moloch and Baal led to the extinction of those cultures. But the worship of Jehovah, the God of compassion, gave birth to a culture that endures today and brings joy to millions. Question: which God are you a child of?